Welcome everyone to the third session of the Global Expert Speaker Series. Today we have Ms. Julie Marshall joining us virtually from Ontario, Canada. She is a Canadian spokesperson of the World Food Programme. The World Food Programme is the world's largest humanitarian agency fighting hunger worldwide. WFP is part of the United Nations system, begun in 1961, and is funded through donations. In our audience, we have some of the most inspired students from Alpha Secondary School in Burnaby, BC. For your information, Burnaby is home to just over 220,000 citizens and 8 secondary schools. Our school enrolls approximately 1,000 students. The next hour promises to shed light and wisdom about the state of food supply for the world's most vulnerable people. I would like to invite Alpha student Lucas Fleming to provide more information about Ms. Marshall. Thank you.
Thank you and good afternoon, Ms. Marshall, teachers and students. On behalf of Alpha Secondary School students, we wish to welcome Ms. Julie Marshall. Since joining the World Food Programme in 2006, Ms. Marshall has handled media relations, media briefings, fundraising, awareness and advertising campaigns, produced educational and promotional material, worked with World Food Programme ambassadors, and created communications for the private sector. I have to take a breath there. She's one of only 2 World Food Programme officials in Canada. Before joining the UN, Julie worked for 20 years in public relations and marketing based in Ontario, Canada. She was born and grew up in Coventry, England. Please join us in a warm welcome for our special guest, Ms. Julie Marshall.
That means that 1 in 9 people in the world simply doesn't know where their next meal is coming from, what they're going to eat tomorrow. And hunger is in fact the greatest risk to world health, bigger than AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis combined. And hunger, poor nutrition, actually is the cause of nearly half the deaths of children under 5 globally. So it may not be that they actually starve or they don't have enough food, but the malnutrition actually brings on diseases that eventually the children succumb to. The most important period in a child's or anybody's life as far as nutrition is concerned is the first 1,000 days from conception to the age of 2. And that really, if the mother and the child do not get enough nutrition, not just food, but good nutrition within that window of opportunity, then there's irreversible damage can be done for those first 2 years, mental and physical. And the signs of that are people that don't do as well at school, they don't get a good enough job when they leave school, and they're physically not as tall or as big generally if they haven't had enough nutrition in that first 1,000 days. And the shame of it is that it really is at this point enough food in the world for everybody. The problem is access. Some people simply do not have access, through different reasons, don't have access to nutritious food. So I'll tell you who we are. As we've said, we're the World Food Programme is the largest humanitarian agency in the world. We feed on average around 80 million people every single year in 80 different countries. And our mission really is to save lives in emergencies. So when you hear about an emergency like the crisis in Syria, WFP is there saving lives. We also help people and countries recover after an emergency. So after there's been a flood or after a drought, we are there making sure that they can recover. And they also help people prepare for emergencies. So when we can see that there's been consistently bad weather or dry weather, and we know that the next lean season or the crops, when they come to harvest, crops will not be as good, we need to be there ready to support these people to help them so they're preparing for that emergency or that drought as it comes. And we also help them, we help people reduce the amount of undernourishment throughout the world. And we can do that in different ways, and one of them is through our knowledge. So we may not be physically giving food to a certain country, but we may be sharing our knowledge and our logistical know-how and our technology. And that'll help people not be as hungry as they are. We do that with 14,000 staff. We have 14,000 staff working around the world. As we said, there's only a few people working in Canada. I'm one of them. But all of our staff, over 90% of our staff actually work in the field. And that's in the countries in which we serve. We have the greatest logistical power than any other humanitarian agency as well. Any given day, we have 5,000 trucks 50 aircraft and about 30 large ships moving food around the world. But we also use donkeys, yaks, camels, anything that we need, camels and elephants even, to get food from one part of the world to another. Very often the world's poorest people, the ones who are in need of food assistance, are not easy to get to. So it's maybe in Nepal, when there was an earthquake just a few months ago, actually it was more than that, it was a while ago, when there was an earthquake, the worst affected people were actually in the mountains high up, where it was very difficult to reach them. So once we'd reached a certain amount of people with helicopters, we would then had to send donkeys with trekkers up the mountains to help them take the food and take it one by one with a sack of food on their back up to the people that needed it the most. So any way we can get food to a child or to a family or a community, we take. We also work in any major emergencies. So when you get a large-scale emergency like an earthquake, we head the logistics cluster. So all the UN agencies that are involved and NGOs that are involved turn to us, and we organize the logistical cluster. So we'll make sure that the airports are open, that the roads are clear, and then we organize how each organization should get their staff in and their humanitarian supplies, not just our food. Also, we head the telecommunications cluster, which again, in a multi-scale emergency or a multi-agency emergency, we're there on the ground first, making sure that the communications are set up so all the government, the local government, and all the humanitarian partners can talk to one another. And we're also the joint lead agency on food, making sure that people have the food that they need. So we do this by, we have lots of different programs that we run, but nutrition runs through all of our programs. So making sure that we don't just deliver food, but we deliver nutritious food. And as I talked about, those first 1,000 days are an important window where we have to make sure that we reach the world's most vulnerable, and that is actually women and small children. So making sure that they have the food and the nutrition that they need. And we do that in a number of different ways. We have products that we use. These are high energy biscuits, and this is an excellent product. They cost around 25 cents to produce, depending on where they're made. We tend to make them locally in the countries in which we're using them now when we can. They're very simply biscuits with lots of vitamins and minerals in them. And these come in very handy in our school feeding programs, but also in an emergency. Because you'll see in an emergency that people may not have access to electricity or to cooking utensils. If it's a drought, maybe, or a flood, maybe they haven't got clean water. So with these, you simply open the package and eat the biscuit. So good for children, young children, but also adults, to give them the nutrients and the minerals that they need. Sorry. This is a packet of micronutrient powder, and this is what we call sprinkles. These were originally developed in Toronto. And what we do with these is we simply open the packet and add these to a family's food or to a school feeding program's food. And on something like rice that may not have all the nutrients and micronutrients that you need and the vitamins, this will add all that to it. So for 20 people, for around 17 cents, it adds all the micronutrients that you need. This is ready to eat food. So this is ideal for small children and babies. And again, you just rip off the top of the package and feed it to a small child around 6 months old. And this gives them all the nutrients that they need. And this package is made from chickpeas, vegetable oil, and skimmed milk. And most of the products in here, most of the ingredients were actually sourced from Pakistan. They were made in a factory in Pakistan, given to our beneficiaries within the country. And we try to do that in the countries that we serve. One of the other programs that we run is school meals. And we feed around 20 million children. We give them free school meals in 60 different countries around the world. And these school meals are ideal for getting girls into classrooms. So typically in regions where girls are not encouraged to go to school, parents are encouraged to send their kids because they'll get a free meal, a nutritious meal. And often girls are kept at home to look after other siblings, to look after the family, or simply to look for food. Now, if they're given a free meal at school, they also get an education their family will send them. And that has lots of really good benefits. First of all, the child will get an education, which they may not have got before. They'll have a nutritious meal, and they'll also have access to some healthcare from one of our partners, which may be UNICEF, making sure they have deworming tablets or their immunizations. And obviously, when you introduce school feeding to a school, the enrollment goes up. So I visited a school in Ethiopia where there was initially around 200, mostly boys in the school. When they introduced a school feeding program, there was suddenly 900 kids at the school. Attendance was nearly 100%, and very few children were off. These kids would walk 2 or 3 hours a day to get to the school. They'd have breakfast in the morning, and they'd have lunch at lunchtime before going home. And basically, they were serving meals all day, but the food was what got the kids into the school in the first place, and they then got an education. The school meals are now not just shipped in. We don't just deliver food and the parent volunteers cook it. What we try to do is organize a way that the schools themselves purchase the food locally from the local farmers and the local farmers associations, helping the smallholder farmers, who are mostly women in the community, and the school children then get the vitamins and minerals that they need within the school. And these school meals cost around 25 cents. We also have take-home rations, mostly for girls. So to keep girls into school that little bit longer, which is a problem because girls are often encouraged to leave school and to marry early. Now, to keep them in school, what we do is we give take-home rations, and in different countries that can mean something different. In Afghanistan, for instance, we give oil, cooking oil. And that, again, keeps a child or a girl in school that little bit longer. And we're hoping that what that will do is break the cycle of poverty. Because she's kept in school longer, hopefully she's not married earlier. And if she's not married earlier, she's just waiting that little bit longer to have a family. And she's well nourished because she's been fed at the school feeding program. In turn, her child will then be not as malnourished, trying to break that cycle. And because she's had an education, very often she'll have fewer children, and she'll encourage her girls and children to have an education as well. So school meals are an excellent way to get kids in school, get them educated, break that cycle of poverty, and as a safety net for the families that can't afford to feed their kids. One of the other things that we do is, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier, where we purchase around $1.2 billion worth of food every year. And what we've tried to do is shift from purchasing and receiving in-kind donations of food, but purchasing in country or in the regions in which we work where possible. So if there's a wide-scale drought, it's very difficult then to purchase food within that local area. But if there's a flood or if there's an earthquake, very often in those sort of circumstances or ongoing development programs, we can purchase the food locally within the community. And that helps the people in the community as well as giving them the ingredients and food that they need. And what we try to do is take that local purchase sort of one step further. And we started a program called Purchase for Progress. And what that does is basically we work with lots of different partners, bringing together smallholder farmers, mostly women, and we give them the tools that they need to grow more, diversify their crops first of all, and grow more vegetables and fruit. Give them the vitamins and minerals that their children in the community need. And some of the markets will actually purchase the food from them, so we're giving them a stable market to sell to. We encourage them to sort of encourage the yield, so grow more because we're there to purchase from them. Also get a better quality of food from them. And then we're there to purchase it, but also the private sector. So supermarkets will start purchasing, or the local shops might be purchasing. In Central America, I saw this in Ecuador, where a smallholder association, mostly women, got together and they were able to cut out the middleman. And literally it was a middleman that would go and give them a bad price for their crop and sell it on the market. When we're there to give them a good price and a fair price for their product, they know they can grow more, that we will be there to buy it. They're making a living and they have a better standing in the community. And the whole community benefits because they're receiving more nutritious food. So we've just taken that one step further, helping the local farmers as well as the people that we're giving the food to as well. Another program that we run is called Food for Work or Food for Assets. And very basically, what we do is we go to a community and we find out why they're hungry. Each community has a different answer to that. Each country and region, it could be a drought, it could be a flood, it could be that there is no road to take their crops to market, so they can't physically get there to sell their crops in time. It could be that their crops are spoiling and they need silos or some way of housing their crops so they don't go off. So we work with them, we give them the tools that they need, and while they fix the infrastructure or they do the work on the projects, we're giving them the food or the cash to purchase the food so they can feed their families while they're doing that work. That way, they're not reliant on the aid, they help themselves, and they're able then to feed themselves once we've been and then we've gone. They're not reliant on us anymore. We also have food for training, and some good examples of that I've seen in Afghanistan, where we gather women together, the most vulnerable ones that are women-headed households. Sometimes they don't have a husband, have no one to take care of them, they're not allowed to go out and work for themselves. So we give them the training that they need, and it might be to learn to read and write, but it also would be vocational training. Give them a job, learn to sew. One good project was they were making footballs. Apparently they really liked soccer balls and they were making them, they were sewing them and selling them. So their husbands or their brothers or their fathers allowed them to come to these classes. And when they were at the classes, they were able to take a ration home with them. So again, they might take a sack of wheat or a can of oil, and then they felt good about themselves, they were encouraged, and they were able then to help themselves and to start make a living for themselves. Okay, so we don't always give food to people that need it. Sometimes if there's food in the market, but the people that need help are too poor to purchase it, we give them either cash or a voucher or a debit card. And this is one of the debit cards. In fact, I think this one came from Lebanon, and it says MasterCard on it because they're one of our partners on it. And what we're able to do, this is something that we use for our Syrian refugees, is we load up what used to be $30 per person on this card, and one family member would have the card, and they would be able to go to a store and purchase whatever they needed. Now that has a huge advantage on giving somebody food. First of all, it gives the person the dignity to go into a store and purchase what they want for themselves. Secondly, they can buy things that wouldn't generally be in our food basket. So they might be able to buy eggs, milk, fresh vegetables. Generally, when we give food, it's lentils, beans, sometimes tinned food, rice, fortified rice, oil, sugar, salt. But this is slightly different. This means that we're not transporting food across the country. We don't have a large carbon footprint. We don't have the cost of housing food and warehousing it and having to purchase it and ship it. But it also it cuts the cost of transporting it in Syria, in the region of Syria where the refugees are working, are based. Sorry. And one of the things that I did want to talk to you about, I've sort of given you an overview of the different programs and different way in which we work, but I wanted to talk to you about one specific country, so it gives you an idea. And I guess the biggest challenge that the World Food Programme have right now is in Syria. So I'm sure all of you have seen on the news the problems, the conflict has been going on, approaching its 6th year now. And the World Food Programme are feeding around 4 million people inside Syria every single month. Now, there's huge challenges involved in feeding people because we're feeding people. Our mission is always to feed the world's most vulnerable. So we can't pick sides. We're completely neutral. So we need to get food to the ones that need it the most. And they are sometimes in the opposition-held areas, and sometimes they're in the government-controlled areas. And then there's areas that, are held by different militant groups. So our job is to get food to around 185,000 people every single day in trucks, taking it across the country. And we have to negotiate our way through every checkpoint. So you can imagine how difficult it might be to get 20, 30 trucks from one side of the country to the other and shipping food around the country every time. We have to make sure that our beneficiaries are safe. We have to make sure our staff are safe. And we have to make sure that the food goes where it needs to go, which is to, again, the world's most vulnerable people and the people it's intended for. So in a lot of projects, and including Syria, we work with a national partner. And one of our national partners in Syria is the Red Cross Red Crescent. And they know who the hungry are, and they work on both sides of the divide. So with, as I said, on government-controlled areas and on the militant-controlled areas, and we have to negotiate our way across. Now, we generally give a food basket because there's little food in Syria, and if there is food, it is expensive. So we generally give something like rice, fortified rice, cooking oil, again fortified with minerals and vitamins, salt, sugar, lentils, beans, and occasionally tinned food for people that haven't got fuel. And there's also, because a lot of people in Syria, there's been around 4.6 million people have actually fled the country. And those people have some gone to Europe or tried to get to Europe, which you've heard about again in the news. They're also staying in Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, Iraq, and Egypt. So we're supporting those refugees. And as I said, we're using these cards to do that. So we're giving them, started off as vouchers and now these digital cards. Now, I spoke about the challenges inside Syria, but the challenges for our refugees is our total lack of funding. It costs us around $25 million a week to feed nearly 6 million people. And the 1.4, it's around 1.4, 1.5 Syrian refugees that we're feeding. We were giving them around $30 per person per month on these cards. But then we had a funding shortage. And we had to cut the funding on the card. So these desperate people that have absolutely nothing except the money that we were giving them suddenly went from $30 to $13, which basically meant they were living off 50 cents a day for food. Now, the World Food Programme is voluntary funded, which means that we get no guaranteed funds from any UN agency. We are funded by the US government and 70 different countries around the world fund the World Food Programme. We're also funded by private sector partners and from the general public as well. So when funding starts to run short, it's our beneficiaries that suffer. We were able, because we did get some more funding come through, and we were able to give some of that money back to or to increase the amount of their on their card to around $21 now, which is where it's sitting. But again, $25 million a week is an awful lot to raise. And the humanitarian community and the international community are really struggling to continue to, and other agencies that are working there, because we're not the only ones. Some of the other challenges are both government forces and the militant forces or opposition forces are besieging areas within Syria. That basically means they surround a town, they don't let anybody in or out, and they don't let any humanitarian aid or supplies, food, medicine in or out. And recently in the news, there was a town called Medea in Syria, and it had been cut off since October. They'd had 1 month worth of supplies at that point from the World Food Programme, and nothing since October. So all their food had run out. There was no food to be had. They were living off boiled leaves and boiled spices in water, and people were literally starving. The international community saw photographs of starving children, and they responded, and they put pressure onto both sides of the conflict to allow humanitarian aid through. And the World Food Programme, along with its partners, were able to get food into Medea for about 40,000 people for a month. We actually took 3 different convoys in. We brought in not just our food, but medicine, blankets, and different things that were needed for the community. So our 2 main challenges really in a country like Syria is access. We need to have access to those that need food the most. And we also need consistent funding, knowing that we're getting funding, knowing that we can continue to feed these people on an ongoing basis. And then I guess lastly, I wanted to talk about Canada and our response. So Canada is actually one of our largest donors. They've been consistently high, the third or fourth donor to the World Food Programme for the last 5 years, which means that Canadians take food security very seriously.